we have uncovered at the Broward Sheriff's Office that we've had approximately 20 calls for service over the last few years regarding the killer. We will continue to follow up as we do with any investigation. We want to try and find out why this killer did what he did, what we could learn from it, and how we could keep our kids safe moving forward. So every one of these calls for service will be looked at and scrutinized. If we find out, like in any investigation, that one of our deputies or call takers could have done something better or was remiss, I'll handle it accordingly.
George Nesmith is a student at Stoneman Douglas High School. He knew the shooter, and he joins us tonight by phone. Douglas, thanks for joining us. So, you knew Nicholas Cruz?
Yeah, I got him.
What was your impression of him?
He was always a troublemaker.
Those new details paint a picture of an extremely troubled young man who somehow kept slipping through the cracks despite so many red flags. And now we've obtained new cell phone video that students say outlines some of the troubles Nicholas Cruz had as a student.
Take a look at this new cell phone video obtained by Local 10 News, which appears to show accused shooter Nicholas Cruz in a fight. A student tells us Cruz, wearing a white t-shirt, was fighting with several others in the courtyard at Stoneman Douglas High School on September 20th, 2016. The same date school records we cross-checked show Cruz was suspended for fighting.
Every day we're learning something more and more about the killer.
We've learned the Broward Sheriff's Office got over 20 calls about 19-year-old Nicholas Cruz over the last few years. So many former neighbors remember the trouble.
The police were in the driveway a lot.
Now the Department of Children and Families petitioning to release reports they have on Cruz. The Sun-Sentinel reports DCF investigated him after he cut himself on the social media site Snapchat. Then this bombshell. Someone called the FBI tip line to warn them about Cruz back on January 5th, giving details about Cruz's guns, his desire to kill people, erratic behavior, and disturbing social media posts. That tip, though, never made it to Miami's FBI field office.
The potential of the FBI to miss something is always there. We do our best. We have some protocols to prevent these things. We will be looking into where and how, if something with the protocol broke down.
Just 40 days later, cops say Cruz carried out those threats, killing 17 people.
Or those leads back to the field offices throughout the country. In this case, we are conducting a full-scale review. I will be briefed very soon on that, but I will tell you Monday I went out there myself along with a team and looked through it, and it's a professional operation. Now let me be clear. There was a mistake made. We know that. But it is our job to make sure that we do everything in our power to ensure that does not happen again.
I think they would benefit from a holistic look, not only just this case, but to see, is there other critical information that's been, fallen in the cracks somewhere, and see, are we losing as much as we're gaining?
Kill the NRA sign appears on billboard in Louisville. Now, we saw the Facebook account last week, which, of course, this all brewed up after the school shooting in Florida. The Facebook account where they actively encouraged and incited people to go out and shoot Republicans as revenge for the Florida high school shooting.
Meantime, Democrat lawmakers are renewing their push for tighter gun control laws on the heels of the tragic school shooting. One America's Christian Rose has more.
Congress Democrats intensify their attacks against Second Amendment rights in the immediate aftermath of a deadly school shooting in Florida. Investigation into the tragic incident is still in its early stages, and little information has been released to rush to conclusions related to gun control laws, as well as their applicability and enforcement.
This happens nowhere else other than the United States of America. It only happens here not because of coincidence, not because of bad luck, but as a consequence of our inaction.
Some Democrats calling for stricter gun control have admitted they are consciously politicizing mass shootings, backing it up by questionable claims the Second Amendment only serves the interests of a narrow group of people.
It's a gun lobby invention, this idea that you can't talk about policy change in the 24, 48 hours after a mass shooting. It is a political issue because the only way that this changes is by the laws of the country changing.
Just hours after the shooting, Democrat Colorado Senator Michael Bennet urged for action against gun rights, saying thoughts are not enough. His sentiment was echoed by California Democrat Representative Adam Schiff and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi, while New York Democrat Representative Yvette Clarke went as far as to explicitly call for sensible gun control. Democrats also call for gun-free zones, which only remain gun-free until a criminal shows up with a firearm. Meanwhile, Florida police say the perpetrator may have used a long gun similar to an AR-15. The Sunshine State already has AR-15 related regulations in place, which include requirements of a background check and prohibit the possession of such weapons by people addicted to drugs, having mental issues, and a record of misdemeanors. The 19-year-old assailant had been expelled from school, was involved in continued trouble with local law enforcement, and showed signs of either mental instability, drug addiction, or both.
We don't know how they got a hold of it. I mean, that's the most important point. I mean, how did it happen? Was it stolen? Did it belong to someone and they broke in and got it from a family member? I mean, I'm just speculating. We don't know. So I know that ATR's rerunning those traces now, so we'll learn from that. We'll learn about how they got a hold of the ammunition.
This reveals the inconsistency of Democrat calls for tighter gun control measures, which only limit legal gun purchases. It is also unclear whether the perpetrator had a gun permit under the existing applicable laws, as even the toughest gun laws won't stop those who don't observe the law in the first place.
If a person is predisposed to commit such a horrific event, like go into a school and shoot people, if a person is going to drive a truck into a crowded area, if a person is committed to committing great carnage, there's not anybody or not a lot law enforcement could do about it or any entity could do about it. The only things we can do are train very hard.
This comes amid calls to arm school teachers and encouraging a higher number of well-trained and prepared good guys with guns in high-risk areas. Meanwhile, Democrats have exploited every tragic shooting to push their agenda of taking firearms away from law-abiding citizens and making them increasingly helpless in the face of big government, which often happens to be weak on crime under Democrat leadership due to corruption and inefficiency.
Earlier tonight, I'm going right to you. Earlier tonight, Senator Rubio said that he supported the notion of raising the legal purchasing age from 18 to 21 for semi-automatic weapons. That is not the position of the NRA. Why is it not your position?
Well, it's not the position of the NRA because I think that if we are asking young men and women to go and serve their country, that they should be able to also have a firearm. I'm also thinking of young women.
There is a military exemption. There is a military exemption.
True, but with specifically where it relates to long guns, because it's 21 for handguns, 18 for long guns. But I also think of young women, and you've had a previous town hall where you spoke with a young woman named Kim Corbin, who was a college student who was brutally raped in her dorm, and she was under the age of 21. And one of the things that she speaks out about loudly now is how she wished she would have had the ability to be able to have a shotgun, whatever it was, to be able to defend herself. I was 20 years old when I lived on my own. I didn't live with my parents when I was 20. I lived on my own when I was 20 years old. And I didn't, well, not at first, but I mean, I had a shotgun. But I think that we have to take that into consideration. We have to think about individuals. I mean, if you're old enough to vote, you're old enough to drive a car, you're old enough to serve your country, I think that you are old enough if, now here's the caveat, if anyone wants to listen to the caveat. The caveat though, Jake, and for everybody out there, is if you are not a danger to yourself or others. That's what it comes back to. If you are not a threat to yourself or your community, that is what it comes back to.
Hey, Chris, you're serving.
This is great. First, I want to say I obviously didn't watch because they're on at the same time, but I watched later. And number one, you did a phenomenal job under the most difficult circumstances. I got to give you. Bring us behind the scenes. You were called a murderer. burn her? What else?
Yeah, well, let me set the stage for you. And first off, I want to say that it's hard to be a teenager. It's hard being a grieving teenager. And it's hard being a grieving teenager who's being exploited by a media and made to grieve or asked to grieve publicly on a national stage. This was an arena full of survivors, victims' parents, and other community members. There were over 7,000 people that were in this arena, Sean. And when we entered, you kind of entered like you were Floyd Mayweather going into the ring. I mean, literally, like you came in from part of the arena and you walked through between all these people and you got up on stage. It was pretty chaotic. It started even before I got up on stage to talk. And the whole reason why I showed up there is because the NRA is made of over 5 million members who are also parents.
I'm one.
You're one of them, and you're a parent. And we didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
We weren't the ones. I mean, why is it that we're held responsible when here, just as you mentioned, just today we learned that the sheriff's office, here you had a deputy who waited upwards of 4 minutes before they went in. And, Sean, we also found out, it was reported this morning, that the parents had reported this murderer to police before. There's a report out there, the records have been discussed in media, where they told police he has threatened people with a gun before. He has held a gun to others' heads. Now, I'm not a member of the FBI. I'm not a member of law enforcement. I love what they do. I appreciate what they do.
You're not doing this because you're being paid either. You do.
I've been a Second Amendment supporter and an NRA lifetime member for a long time. That was a cheap shot. That was a cheap shot by the sheriff because he's trying to cover his backside.
Point of view, that's fine, but what he did was wrong.
It was wrong, and he has questions to answer.
And he never went in.
An armed deputy who was on campus during last week's deadly high school shooting in Florida didn't even go into the building after hearing gunshots, according to law enforcement.
In the case of Scott Peterson, our school resource deputy was absolutely on campus through this entire event. He was armed, he was in uniform.
After reviewing surveillance video of the incident, Broward County Sheriff Scott Israel says Scott Peterson, the deputy assigned to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, took up a position outside the school, but never entered the building or tried to confront the shooter, who killed 14 students and 3 staff members that day. When asked how Peterson should have responded, the sheriff did not mince words.
Went in, addressed the killer, killed the killer.
Because Americans have reached saturation level. They're so sick of it. It's so heartbreaking that they actually often turn away. And we still have the conversation trying to find solutions.
You're saying that, though, it's malicious. You're saying that it's malicious, but yet on your network, you've allowed accusations against me and millions of law-abiding Americans and to be indicted as child murderers. I've watched you, Allison, on your program at this very time slot, and you've allowed that to stand uncorrected on your network. You've allowed it to stand uncorrected on your network.
That's
if you want to have a discussion of maliciousness,
it's not true.
But I don't want to get here, Allison, though, to go back and forth with you. It is true.
We have to be fact-based.
Coverage. No, you've allowed the accusations to stand, Allison. Please follow what I'm saying. You've allowed the accusations to stand.
I don't believe you.
You've done nothing to correct it.
I don't believe you.
You've done nothing to correct that. And that is malicious. And there's malicious coverage by the network.
Dana. They have a very powerful tool. So, I mean, how do you expect politicians who need money to keep running for office to say no to the NRA?
Because we keep telling them that if they accept this blood money, they're against the children. They're against the people who are dying. And that there's no other way to put it at this point. You're either funding the killers or you are standing with the children who have no money. We don't have jobs, so we can't pay for your campaign. We would hope that you have the decent morality to support us at this point.
And not take money from people that want to keep lessening gun legislation and making it even easier for these horrifying people to get guns. Because if you can't get elected without taking money from child murderers, why are you running?
Hey guys, are you going to be able to go back to school?
Colton Hobb joins us tonight. Colton, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. And before we get into anything, I just want to make sure that everybody hasn't forgotten why we are actually here tonight. I mean, we lost 17 lives last week, and
yes,
I actually physically put 2 to rest, and to me that was the hardest thing in the world to endure. I mean, nobody should have to go through this, so as long as we're taking the right steps to move forward from this and make sure that this doesn't happen again, I'm all for that.
Well, we certainly haven't forgotten. Thank you for reminding us yet again, and we think that the only way to make the country better and maybe put a dent in this scourge is to have a rational, thoughtful conversation about what to do next. And with that in mind, absolutely, you were planning to go to this event last night. And tell me if I'm mischaracterizing any of this. And you sent in, at the request of a CNN producer, you sent in a number of questions, statements you wanted to make, questions that you wanted to ask of the politicians on the stage. And they rewrote one of your questions? Is that right?
Yes, sir. So what had happened was 4 days ago, I had gotten contacted by a lady named Carrie Stevenson from CNN. She had asked me originally to just write a speech. It was going to be at the town hall at the BB&T Center. So I agreed. I felt like it would be the right thing to do, be able to go speak my part, as well as open eyes to a few things that I thought that could make this situation a little better. From there, 3 days ago, so the next day after that, we had gotten, I got an email back from her, and she asked for more of questions rather than a speech, which I was totally fine with. So I wrote a little less of a speech and more of questions that I wanted to ask at the town hall. The day after that, it was more of just questions. She asked for just questions that I would like to ask. So I gave her my questions, and then yesterday at about 5:15, I made contact with her, and she had asked if I just asked her one question. So what they had actually done was wrote out a question for me, because in my interview with CNN, I had talked about arming the teachers if they were willing to arm themselves in the school to carry on campus. And they had, she had taken that of what I had briefed on and actually wrote that question out for me. So I have that question here if you'd like me to ask it for you.
Well, but I just want to make sure I have this straight. So you sent them a long, in effect, essay on what you thought, but they put
Yes,
their
sir.
own words in the question, and they weren't the same as the words you had sent in? They were the producer's words?
Absolutely. They had taken what I had wrote and what I had briefed on and talked about, and they actually wrote the question for me.
But not with your words. I mean, they put their own words into your question, even after they'd asked you to send questions in. But that seems dishonest.
It definitely did, and that's kind of why I didn't go last night. Originally, I had thought that it was going to be more of my own question and my own say, and then it turned out to be more of just a script. And she had actually said that over the phone, that I needed to stick to the script.
That's remarkable. What did you watch last night?
I watched a little bit of it. I kind of felt like I didn't really need to, because I knew that as soon as what had happened with me, that it was going to be more scripted and wasn't actually going to be actual questions. Then I didn't feel the need to fully watch it.
So if CNN was willing to reword your question, put their own words in your mouth, and as you said, you didn't want to go along with that, do you think they did that to other people last night?
I mean, absolutely. From what I did see, I'd seen a couple people that had asked questions before I did leave my house. And it was a little piece of paper cut out. And I know for a fact that nobody cut their own paper out and wrote their own question, especially when they were all based off the same topic. So to me, from right there, it showed that this isn't correct. Why are they all have the same size piece of paper with a short little question on it? So to
I guess
me, it was a total
what's
waste of
surprising is
my time, honestly.
you're not just some person off the street. You're a survivor of this shooting, and the point was to listen to you, to the survivors of the shooting. Were you surprised by the way they behaved?
I mean, honestly, it was very shocking to me, because we just went through such a horrific tragedy. For them to take that and now make such a big news cast over what they want to hear, it was very upsetting to me.
Nicholas Cruz avoided eye contact during this afternoon's hearing, silently staring down. It was his second time in court since last Wednesday's shooting. And more missed warning signs have emerged. Newly released documents reveal that in September 2016, an investigator with Florida's Department of Children and Families visited the Cruz household after allegations of medical neglect. The investigator noted Cruz had depression, ADHD, and autism, that he cut his arms in a Snapchat post, and that he plans to go out and buy a gun. DCF closed the investigation 6 weeks later, saying the agency found no evidence of mistreatment.
All right, John, let's talk about this. First of all, according to the FBI, and the latest data that we have from this is from 2016. The data from 2017 has not yet come in. The latest data in 2016, there were 15,070 homicides in our country. 11,004 of those 15,000 homicides were gun-related homicides. What percentage of those were committed with rifles, John?
A very small percent. I think it's around 5%.
It's 2.5%. 2.5% of homicides in our country were committed with rifles. We can go down the list. Shotguns, homicides by shotguns, 1.7%. Handguns, 47% of homicides in our country were committed by handguns. 11.9% were committed with knives. 4.4% were committed with hands and feet. My question is, why are liberals targeting AR-15s? Why are they targeting semi-automatic rifles? Why are they targeting rifles at all when twice as many murderers kill their victims with their feet?
This shows the dishonesty going on among liberals who are trying to get rid of all guns. Again and again, now they're saying we want to get rid of all semi-automatic weapons, which was basically almost every kind of a gun you can get your hands on now, or you can purchase. But they aren't interested in focusing on solutions. One thing, too, if you look at the stats, if they were concerned about murder or gun violence, the crime rate has plummeted almost every year since 1991. They don't seem to mention that. Gun violence has dramatically decreased. It's far lower, definitely, than when the Columbine shooting occurred. So, again, they aren't interested in solutions. They're interested in taking the rights away from the American people, rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution.
Right, because it seems to me conservatives are doing their utmost right now to come up with solutions. And the only thing that Democrats are offering as a way to fix this is to excoriate conservatives and the NRA, blame them as if they were the ones who pulled the trigger, which they were not. The shooter was not a Republican, not an NRA member, and offering to take away all of our guns.
Dan Bongino, a former Secret Service agent, he joins us tonight. So there's a huge controversy online that I'm hesitant even to wade in on, but I think it needs to be addressed, and it's over the protests led by the students.
Sure.
For whom all of us feel terrible, because you can't imagine anything worse than your kid's school getting shot up. But all of a sudden you're seeing these kids involved in calls for very specific pieces of legislation. And the allegation has been that they are in some way in contact with organized anti-gun groups, and people who have suggested that have been denounced as immoral and heartless, and how dare you question these kids or attack them, which, for the record, I am certainly not doing.
Right.
But I think it raises interesting questions about how we make our law.
Right. You know, what's interesting about this is I'm with you 100%. If you are involved in a horrific, unimaginable tragedy like this, your voice should be heard. They are obviously important voices in what happened. But what I find ironic about it is a couple things. Number one, where I think their voices are most valuable, Tucker, are not on the components the media is paying attention to. In other words, supply side measures to get rid of guns.
Yes.
Where their voices would be valuable is where were the signs missed? These students were there. They dealt with this kid every day. But the media is focused more on a teenager's expertise in supply side control measures for guns, which, Tucker, let's be candid, they probably have not studied a very complicated, layered issue. They absolutely unequivocally have the right, and after what they've been through, we want to hear their voices. But the media is focusing on an agenda and not, ironically, where these kids could be most valuable.
Well, they're using these kids in a kind of moral blackmail where you're not allowed to disagree or you're attacking the child, which is, of course, I can speak for myself, the last thing I would ever do as a father of four. Yeah. You would never attack the kid. You can disagree with other people's opinions without attacking them. But the press is conflating that and making it like you're not allowed to disagree, you're a bad person.
Well, did you notice the doublespeak here as well? When it comes to things like immigration rights, they don't seek subject matter expertise from parents who've been killed by illegal immigrants. When it comes to things like the victims of terrorist attacks, their voices, no, to be candid here, I get it. They can say, someone may come back and say, well, Republicans come out and they say, what about Kate's Law? Fine. But we gave them a voice, and we followed it up with a substantive law, and we understand, and I'm saying to you, these kids should be heard. But the left-leaning media will not do the same. They will give these kids a platform to talk about these legislative issues, but they won't give anyone else on an issue that doesn't fit their agenda the exact same
totally
platform.
Right. Creepy propaganda outlets like CNN. I guess what I just disagree with is the idea that anybody who has an alternate view is removed from the conversation on moral grounds immediately. That is their play,
well,
always.
I mean, Tucker, it's all critical theory stuff. It's meant to minimize and put you. It wins the argument before the argument starts by making sure Tucker Carlson's a bad guy. Therefore, whatever Tucker Carlson says is therefore unworthy of the conversation.
Smart. That's such a smart. I wish I had expressed it as crisply as you just did. Thank you.
That's a big compliment.
That was good.
Brother.
I was impressed.
What they say is if you don't make everything available, eventually you're getting to a place where they will take away your guns. And that's where the insanity is.
No one is questioning your right to have a gun. We're not talking about taking guns away from people. Nobody's taking away anybody's gun. They're going to say that if you give them bump stock, it's going to be the slippery slope. I certainly hope so.
It's not that I want to take away people's guns.
Those common sense measures would in no way infringe on any constitutional right.
It's going to be the slippery slope. I certainly hope so.
It's not taking away your Second Amendment rights or doing away with guns.
To convince people that this isn't about taking their guns away.
I certainly hope so.
They view it as a norm, and they don't want any of their rights infringed, even if that norm threatens, threatens people's lives.
I am a Second Amendment supporter. I do not want to take away any gun rights that are held through constitutional protections.
I certainly hope so.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Within minutes of the Parkland, Florida massacre, our media identified a villain. It wasn't the 19-year-old who actually pulled the trigger. CNN actually published a piece last night scolding the president for calling him crazy. That was a slur, according to them. No, the real killer, the media told us, was the NRA, along with millions of law-abiding gun owners. Blood was on their hands. Well, a few days later, now that we have some facts, it turns out it's not so simple. It turns out that government at all levels played a role in allowing this massacre to happen. In fact, a much larger role than we knew or ever would have guessed. The details are shocking. Here's part of what we've learned so far. The Broward County Sheriff's Office received at least 23 calls related to Nicholas Cruz and his family. In 2016, a deputy was told directly that Cruz was threatening to shoot up his school, the one he shot up, and had taken photographs of himself with firearms. That information was forwarded to Deputy Scott Peterson. That name sounds familiar. That is the exact security guard at Stoneman Douglas High School who hid outside during the shooting and refused to go inside as 17 people were murdered. Apparently doing nothing was a habit of Peterson's. President Trump weighed in on him today on his way to CPAC. Watch.
When it came time to get in there and do something, he didn't have the courage or something happened. But he certainly did a poor job. There's no question about that. He was there for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes. That was during the entire shooting. He heard it right at the beginning. So he certainly did a poor job. But that's a case where somebody was outside, they're trained, they didn't react properly under pressure, or they were cowards.
Scott Peterson may not have been the only coward on the scene. Brand new reports tonight suggest that 3 other Broward County deputies arrived at the school during the massacre but did not enter or attempt to pursue Cruz. Instead, they hid outside behind their vehicles until Coral Springs police officers arrived and found them. Inaction appears to be a defining quality in the Broward County Sheriff's Office. Last November, Broward County was warned that Cruz was a school shooter in the making and was collecting weapons with which to do it. They didn't even write a report on the tip, and instead they told the tipster to report Cruz to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office. That's how local police responded, or didn't respond. The state wasn't much better later in 2016, despite evidence of suicidal behavior by Cruz and his expressed desire to buy a firearm. The Florida Department of Children and Families decided that somehow he was not a threat to himself or others. If they decided otherwise, Cruz would have been involuntarily committed and would have been barred from buying a gun. So in case you're wondering, how was this guy able to buy a gun? That's how. And then there's the FBI, the feds. In September 2017, the FBI was warned that a YouTube user named Nicholas Cruz, spelled correctly, had written this, quote, "I'm going to be a professional school shooter." He wrote that online. The FBI now says that was not enough information to identify who made that remark, and they were unable to investigate, despite the fact that Cruz gave his real name spelled in the unusual way that it is spelled. In January 2018, the FBI was warned again that Cruz was planning to shoot up a school and were given specific information about his erratic behavior, his gun collecting, his expressed desire to kill people. He did not hide that. The tipster warned that Cruz was, quote, going to explode, and worried it was just a matter of time before he, quote, was in a school and shooting the place up. The caller also told the FBI that she made the call because she wanted a, quote, clear conscience if he takes off and just starts shooting places up. In response, the FBI did nothing. They didn't even bother to forward that tip to their Miami field office, so it died. The school system failed as well, and badly. In 2013, school officials decided to radically cut down on in-school arrests, claiming that school discipline was racially biased. The school simply stopped referring students to police for assault and drug use and numerous other crimes, actual crimes. Total arrests declined from more than 1,000 a year to fewer than 400. So in spite of getting in trouble with school authorities repeatedly, Cruz was never arrested, he was never charged, never convicted, never stopped from buying a gun. The schools failed, the local police failed, the Florida state bureaucracy failed, the officer on duty failed, the FBI failed. The government's first duty is protecting its citizens. They failed. Ultimately, citizens have to defend themselves. The message could not be clearer, and yet the same government officials who failed to protect us are saying we don't have a right to protect ourselves.